of cliff breaking have left a chasm, and in the chasm are foam and yellow sands. Beyond, red roofs about a narrow wharf in cluster, then a mouldered church, and higher a long street climbs to one tall towered mill. And high in heaven behind it, a grey down with Danish barrows, and a hazelwood by autumn nutters haunted, flourishes green in a cup-like hollow of the down. Here on this beach, 100 years ago, 3 children of 3 houses. Annie Lee, the prettiest little damsel in the port. And Philip Ray, the miller's only son. And Enoch Arden, a rough sailor's lad made orphan by a winter shipwreck, played along the waste and lumber of the shore. A narrow cave ran in beneath the cliff. In this the children played at keeping house. Enoch was host one day, Philip the next, while Annie still was mistress. But at times Enoch would hold possession for a week. "This is my house, and this my little wife." "Mine too," said Philip, turn and turn about, when, if they quarreled, Enoch's stronger maid was master. Then would Philip, his blue eyes all flooded with the helpless wrath of tears, shriek out, "I hate you, Enoch!" And at this the little wife would weep for company and pray them not to quarrel for her sake, and say she would be little wife to both. But when the dawn of rosy childhood passed, and the new warmth of life's ascending sun was felt by either fixed his heart on that one girl. And Enoch spoke his love, but Philip loved in silence. And the girl seemed kinder unto Philip than to him, but she loved Enoch, though she knew it not, and would, if asked, deny it. Enoch set a purpose evermore before his eyes, to hoard all savings to the uttermost, to purchase his own boat and make a home for Annie, and so prospered that at last a luckier or a bolder fisherman, a carefuller in peril, did not breathe for leagues along that breaker-beaten coast than Enoch. Likewise had he served a year on board a merchantman and made himself full sailor, and he thrice had plucked a life from the dread sweep of the downstreaming seas, and all men looked upon him favorably. And ere he touched his 21st May, he purchased his own boat and made a home for Annie, neat and nest-like, halfway up the narrow street that clambered toward the mill. Then, on on a golden autumn eventide, the younger people making holiday with bag and sack and basket, great and small, went nutting to the hazels. Philip stayed, his father lying sickly and needing him an hour behind. But as he climbed the hill, just where the prone edge of the wood began to feather toward the hollow, he saw the pair. Enoch and Annie sitting hand in hand, his large gray eyes and weather-beaten face all kindled by a still and sacred fire that burned as on an altar. Philip looked, and in their eyes and faces read his doom. Then, as their faces drew together, groaned, and slipped aside, and like a wounded life crept down into the hollows of the wood, there, while the rest, loud in merrymaking, had his dark hour. And rose and passed, bearing a lifelong hunger. In his heart. So these were wed, and merrily rang the bells, and merrily ran the years, 7 happy years, 7 happy years of health and competence, and mutual love and honorable toil, with children, first a daughter. In him woke with his first babe's first cry the noble wish to save all earnings to the uttermost, and give his child a better bringing up than his had been or hers. A wish renewed when 2 years after came a boy to be the rosy idol of her solitudes. While Enoch was abroad on wrathful seas, or often journeying landward, for in truth, Enoch's white horse and Enoch's ocean spoil in ocean-smelling osier, and his face rough-reddened with 1,000 winter gales, not only to the market cross were known, but in the leafy lanes behind the down, far as the portal warding lion whelp and peacock yew tree of the lonely hall, whose Friday fare was Enoch's ministering. Then came a change, as all things human change. 10 miles to northward of the narrow port opened a larger haven. Thither used Enoch at times to go by land or sea, and once when there, and clambering on a mast in harbor by mischance, he slipped and fell. A limb was broken when they lifted him, and while he lay recovering there, his wife bore him another son, a sickly one. Another hand crept too across his trade, taking her bread and theirs, and on him fell, although a grave and staid, God-fearing man, yet lying thus in active doubt and gloom. He seemed, as in a nightmare of the night, to see his children leading evermore low, miserable lives of hand to mouth, and her he loved, a beggar. Then he prayed, "Save me from this, save them from this, whatever comes to me." And while he prayed, the master of that ship Enoch had served in hearing his mischance, came, for he knew the man and valued him, reporting of his vessel China-bound, and wanting yet a boatswain. Would he go? There yet were many weeks before she sailed from this port. Would Enoch have the place? And Enoch all at once assented to it, rejoicing at that answer to his prayer. So now that shadow of mischance appeared no graver than as when some little cloud cuts off the fiery highway of the sun and aisles a light in the offing. Yet the wife, when he was gone, the children, what to do? Then Enoch lay long pondering on his plans to sell the boat, yet he loved her well. How many a rough sea had he weathered in her. He knew her as a horseman knows his horse, and yet to sell her then with what she brought, buy goods and stores, set Annie forth in trade, with all that seamen needed or their wives, so might she keep the house while he was gone. Should he not trade himself out yonder, go this voyage more than once, yea, twice or thrice, as oft as needed, last returning rich, becoming the master of a larger craft, with fuller profits, lead an easier life, have all his pretty young ones educated, and pass his days in peace among his own. Thus Enoch in his heart determined all. Then moving homeward came on Annie, pale, nursing the sickly babe, her latest born. Forward she started with a happy cry and laid the feeble infant in his arms, whom Enoch took and handled all his limbs, appraised his weight and fondled father-like, but had no heart to break his purposes to Annie till the morrow, when he spoke. Then, first since Enoch's golden ring had girt her finger, Annie fought against his will. Yet not with brawling opposition she, but manifold entreaties, many a tear, many a sad kiss by day, by night renewed, sure that all evil would come out of it, besought him, supplicating if he cared for her or for his dear children, not to go. He, not for his own self caring, but her and her children, let her plead in vain. So grieving held his will and bore it through. For Enoch parted with his old sea friend, bought Annie goods and stores, and set his hand to fit their little streetward sitting room, with shelf and corner for the goods and stores. So all day long, till Enoch's last at home, shaking their pretty cabin, hammer and axe, auger and saw, while Annie seemed to hear her own death scaffold raising, shrilled and rang till this was ended, and his careful hand, the space was narrow, having ordered all almost as neat and close as nature packs her blossom or her seedling, paused, and he who needs would work for Annie to the last, ascending tired, heavily slept till morn. And Enoch faced this morning a farewell brightly and boldly. All his Annie's fears, save as his Annie's, were a laughter to him. Yet Enoch, as a brave, God-fearing man, bowed himself down, and in that mystery, where God in man is one with man in God, prayed for a blessing on his wife and babes, whatever came to him. And then he said, Annie, this voyage, by the grace of God, will bring fair weather yet to all of us. Keep a clean hearth and a clear fire for me, for I'll be back, my girl, before you know it. Then, lightly rocking baby's cradle, and he, this pretty, puny, weakly little one, nay, for I love him all the better for it. Ha ha! God bless him. He shall sit upon my knees, and I will tell him tales of foreign parts, and make him merry when I come home again. Come, Annie, come, cheer up before I go. Him running on thus hopefully she heard, and almost hoped herself. But when he turned the current of his talk to graver things, in sailor fashion, roughly sermonizing on providence and trust in heaven, she heard, and not heard him. As the village girl who sets her pitcher underneath the spring, musing on him that used to fill it for her, hears, and not hears, and lets it overflow. At length she spoke. "O Enoch, you are wise, and yet for all your wisdom, well I know that I shall look upon your face no more." "Well then," said Enoch, "I shall look upon yours. Annie, the ship I sail in passes here." He named the day. "Get you a seaman's glass, spy out my face, and laugh at all your fears." But when the last of those last moments came, "Annie, my girl, cheer up, be comforted, look to the babes. Until I come again, keep everything ship-shape, for I must go, and fear no more for me, or, if you fear, cast all your cares on God. That anchor holds. Is he not yonder in those uttermost parts of the morning? If I flee to these, can I go from him? And the sea is his. The sea is his. He made it." Enoch rose, cast his strong arms about his drooping wife, and kissed his wonder-stricken little ones, but for the third, the sickly one, who slept after a night of feverish wakefulness. When Annie would have raised him, Enoch said, "Wake him not, let him sleep. How should the child remember this?" and kissed him in his cot. But Annie, from her baby's forehead, clipped a tiny curl and gave it. This he kept through all his future. But now hastily caught his bundle, waved his hand, and went his way. When the day that Enoch mentioned came, borrowed a glass, but all in vain. Perhaps she could not fix the glass to suit her eye. Perhaps her eye was dim, hand tremulous. She saw him not, and while he stood on deck waving, the moment and the vessel passed. Even to the last dip of the vanishing sail, she watched it. And departed, weeping for him. Then, though she mourned his absence as his grave, set her sad will no less to chime with his, but throve not in her trade, not being bred to barter, nor compensating the want by shrewdness, neither capable of lies, nor asking overmuch and taking less, and still foreboding, what would Enoch say? For more than once in days of difficulty and pressure had she sold her wares for less than what she gave in buying what she sold. She failed and saddened knowing it, and thus, expectant of that news which never came, gained for her own a scanty sustenance and lived a life of silent melancholy. Now the third child was sickly born and grew yet sicklier, though the mother cared for it with all a mother's care. Nevertheless, whether her business often called her from it, or through the want of what it needed most, or means to pay the voice who best could tell what most it needed, howsoe'er it was, after a lingering, ere she was aware, like the caged bird, escaping suddenly, the little innocent soul flitted away. In that same week when Annie buried it, Philip's true heart, which hungered for her peace, since Enoch left he had not looked upon her, smote him as having kept aloof so long. Surely, said Philip, I may see her now, may be some little comfort. Therefore went past through the solitary room in front, paused for a moment at an inner door, then struck it thrice, and no one opening, entered. But Annie, seated with her grief fresh from the burial of her little one, cared not to look on any human face, but turned her own toward the wall and wept. Then Philip, standing up, said falteringly, Annie, I came to ask a favor of you. He spoke. The passion in her moaned reply, favor from one so sad and so forlorn as I am? Half abashed him, yet unasked, his bashfulness and tenderness at war, he set himself beside her, saying to her, I came to speak to you of what he wished. Enoch, your husband, I have ever said you chose the best among us, a strong man, for where he fixed his heart, he set his hand to do the thing he willed and bore it through. And wherefore did he go this weary way and leave you lonely? Not to see the world, for pleasure? Nay, but for the wherewithal to give his babes a better bringing up than his had been or yours. That was his wish. And if he come again, vexed will he be to find the precious morning hours were lost. And it would vex him even in his grave if he could know his babes were running wild like colts about the waste. So, Annie, now, have we not known each other all our lives? I do beseech you, by the love you bear him and his children, not to say me nay, for if you will, when Enoch comes again, why then he shall repay me, if you will. Annie, for I am rich and well-to-do. Now let me put the boy and girl to school. This is the favor that I came to ask." Then Annie, with her brows against the wall, answered, "I cannot look you in the face. I seem so foolish and so broken down. When you came in, my sorrow broke me down, and now I think your kindness breaks me down. But Enoch lives. That is borne in on me. He will repay you. Money can be repaid, not kindness such as yours." And Philip asked, "Then you will let me, Annie?" There she turned. She rose and fixed her swimming eyes upon him and dwelt a moment on his kindly face, then calling down a blessing on his head, caught at his hand and wrung it passionately, and passed into the little garth beyond. So, lifted up in spirit, he moved away. Then Philip put the boy and girl to school and bought them needful books, and every way, like one who does his duty by his own, made himself theirs. And though for Annie's sake, fearing the lazy gossip of the port, he oft denied his heart his dearest wish and seldom crossed her threshold, yet he sent gifts by the children, garden herbs and fruit, the late and early roses from his wall, or conies from the down, and now and then with some pretext of fineness in the meal, to save the offense of charitable, flour from his tall mill that whistled on the waste. But Philip did not fathom Annie's mind. Scarce could the woman, when he came upon her out of full heart and boundless gratitude, light on a broken word to thank him with. But Philip was her children's all in all. From distant corners of the street they ran to greet his hearty welcome heartily. Lords of his house and of his mill were they. Lords of his house and of his mill were they, worried his passive ear with petty wrongs or pleasures, hung upon him, played with him, and called him Father Philip. Philip gained as Enoch lost, for Enoch seemed to them uncertain as a vision or a dream, faint as a figure seen in early dawn, down at the far end of an avenue, going we know not where. And so 10 years since Enoch left his hearth and native land, fled forward, and no news of Enoch came. It chanced one evening Annie's children longed to go with others, nutting to the wood, and Annie would go with them. Then they begged for Father Philip, as they called him, too. Him, like the working bee in blossom dust, blanched with his mill, they found, and saying to him, "Come with us, Father Philip," he denied. But when the children plucked at him to go, he laughed and yielded readily to their wish, for was not Annie with them? And they went. But after scaling half the weary down, just where the prone edge of the wood began to feather toward the hollow, all her force failed her, and sighing, "Let me rest," she said. So Philip rested with her, well content, while all the other ones, with jubilant cries, broke from their elders and tumultuously down through the whitening hazels made a plunge to the bottom. and dispersed and bent or broke the lithe, reluctant boughs to tear away their tawny clusters, crying to each other and calling here and there about the wood. But Philip, sitting at her side, forgot her presence and remembered one dark hour here in this wood when, like a wounded life, he crept into the shadow. At last he said, lifting his honest forehead, "Listen, Annie, how merry they are down yonder in the wood. Tired, Annie?" For she did not speak a word. Tired? But her face had fallen upon her hands. At which, as with a kind of anger in him, "The ship is lost," he said. "The ship is lost. No more of that. Why should you kill yourself and make them orphans quite?" And Annie said, "I thought not of it, but I know not why. Their voices make me feel so solitary." Then Philip, coming somewhat closer, spoke, "Annie, there is a thing upon my mind, and it has been upon my mind so long that though I know not when it first came there, I know that it will out at last. Oh, Annie, it is beyond all hope, against all chance, that he who left you 10 long years ago should still be living. Well then, let me speak. I grieve to see you poor and wanting help. I cannot help you as I wish to do, unless they say that women are so quick. Perhaps you know what I would have you know. I wish you for my wife. I fain would prove a father to your children. I do think they love me as a father. I am sure I love them as if they were mine own. And I believe, if you were fast my wife, that after all these sad, uncertain years, we might be still as happy as God grants to any of his creatures. Think upon it. For I am well-to-do, no kin, no care, no burthen, save my care for you and yours, and we have known each other all our lives, and I have loved you longer than you know." Then answered Annie, tenderly she spoke, "You have been as God's good angel in our house. God bless you for it. God reward you for it. Philip was something happier than myself. Can one love twice? Can you ever be loved as Enoch was? What is it that you ask?" "I am content," he answered. "Oh," she cried, scared as it were. "Dear Philip, wait a little while. If Enoch comes—" "But Enoch will not come. Yet wait a year. A year is not so long. Surely I shall be wiser in a year. Oh, wait a little." Philip sadly said, "Annie, as I have waited all my life, I may well wait a little." "Nay," she cried, "I am bound. You have my promise in a year. Will you not bide your year as I bide mine?" And Philip answered, "I will bide my year." Here both were mute, till Philip, glancing up, beheld the dead flame of the fallen day pass from the Danish barrow overhead, Then, fearing night and chill for Annie, rose and sent his voice beneath him through the wood. Up came the children, laden with their spoils. Then all descended to the port, and there at Annie's door he paused and gave his hand, saying gently, "Annie, when I spoke to you, that was your hour of weakness. I was wrong. I am always bound to you, but you are free." Then Annie, weeping, answered, "I am bound." She spoke, and in one moment, as it were, while yet she went about her household ways, even as she dwelt upon his latest words, that he had loved her longer than she knew, that autumn and into autumn flashed again. And there he stood once more before her face, claiming her promise. "Is it a year?" she asked. "Yes, if the nuts be ripe again," he said. "Come out and see." But she put him off. So much to look to, such a change. A month, give her a month. She knew that she was bound. A month, no more. Then Philip, with his eyes full of that lifelong hunger and his voice shaking a little like a drunkard's hand, "Take your own time, Annie, take your own time." And Annie could have wept for pity of him. And yet she held him on delayingly, with many a scarce believable excuse, trying his truth and his long sufferance, till half another year had slipped away. By this, the lazy gossips of the port, abhorrent of a calculation crossed, began to chafe as at a personal wrong. Some thought that Philip did but trifle with her, some that she but held off to draw him on, and others laughed at her, and Philip too, as simple folk that knew not their own minds, and one in whom all evil fancies clung like serpent eggs together, laughingly would hint at worse in either. Her own son was silent, though he often looked his wish. But evermore the daughter pressed upon her to wed the man so dear to all of them and lift the household out of poverty. And Philip's rosy face, contracting, grew careworn and wan, and all these things fell on her sharp as reproach. At last, one night it chanced that Annie could not sleep, but earnestly prayed for a sign. "My Enoch is gone?" Then, compassed round by the blind wall of night, brooked not the expectant terror of her heart, started from her bed and struck herself a light, then desperately seized the holy book, suddenly set it wide to find a sign, suddenly put her finger on the text, "Under the palm tree." That was nothing to her. No meaning there. She closed the book and slept. When lo, her Enoch, sitting on a height under a palm tree, over him the sun. He is gone, she thought. He is happy. He is singing Hosanna in the highest. Yonder shines the sun of righteousness. And these be palms, whereof the happy people strowing cried, Hosanna in the highest. Here she woke, resolved, sent for him, and said wildly to him, "There is no reason why we should not wed." Then, for God's sake, he assured her, for our sakes, as you will wed me, let it be at once. So these were wed, and merrily rang the bells. Merrily rang the bells, and they were wed. But never merrily beat Annie's heart. A footstep seemed to fall beside her path. She knew not whence. A whisper on her ear, she knew not what. Nor loved she to be left alone at home, nor ventured out alone. What ailed her then, that ere she entered, often her hand dwelt lingeringly on the latch, fearing to enter? Philip thought he knew such doubts and fears were common to her state, being with child. But when her child was born, then her new child was as herself renewed. Then the new mother came about her heart. Then her good Philip was her all in all, and that mysterious instinct wholly died. End of the first part.